A new report from the Washington Post reveals former President Donald Trump and his allies have started mapping out specific plans to use the federal government to punish his critics and opponents if he wins a second term in the White House. The plan has been dubbed Project 2025, and the Post reports that Trump has named individuals he wants to investigate or prosecute. Those people include former Chief of Staff John Kelly, former Attorney General Bill Barr, former Attorney Ty Cobb, former Joint Chief of Staff Chairman General Mark Milley. That's according to people who have talked to Trump and spoke on the condition of anonymity. A person familiar with the matter said Trump has also talked about prosecuting officials at the FBI and Justice Department. Additionally, the Post reports the former president's associates have drafted plans to potentially invoke the Insurrection Act on his first day in office to allow Trump to deploy the military against civil demonstrations. Meanwhile, some of the nation's top legal minds are set to gather in 2 days in the nation's capital for a summit to discuss how to protect the Constitution and the rule of law against the rising threats posed by partisan power grabs. The Society for the Rule of Law warns that the conservative legal movement in this country has come to embrace a series of positions antithetical to the American constitutional system. Specifically, the group is sounding the alarm about what it calls the clear and present threat posed by the MAGA movement by reminding Americans that we are a nation of laws, not men. Joining us now are three of the featured speakers at the upcoming summit. Retired Judge J. Michael Luttig, who served on the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. Former Republican Congresswoman Barbara Comstock of Virginia, and attorney George Conway. Thank you all very much for joining us. Judge Luttig, I'll start with you. What are you most concerned about and hope to address at this summit?
Thank you for having us with you this morning, Mika. American democracy, the Constitution, and the rule of law are the causes of our times, and they are righteous causes, if ever there have been righteous causes. The nation's legal profession is uniquely positioned and uniquely obligated to support and defend the Constitution and the rule of law and American democracy. George and Barbara and I feel that the conservative legal movement in particular has an especial obligation to stand up and defend American democracy and the rule of law. But we feel that the conservative movement has failed to do so over the past 8 years. It has not responded. It has not stood up and defended the Constitution and the rule of law against the extraordinary constitutional and legal excesses of the Trump administration and, frankly, the former president himself. And we believe it's time for a new conservative legal movement that of the kind that existed 25, 30 years ago when the conservative legal movement first began, to respond to the exigencies of our times.
So, George, as Judge Luttig pointed out, Donald Trump has flouted the rule of law. He did it throughout his presidency. He is doing it now. He'll do it today at his civil trial in New York City, where he will no doubt speak against the judge and against the attorney general and do whatever he can within the parameters of whatever gag orders are around him. And he'll probably break the gag order. He doesn't care about the rule of law. He doesn't care about the 91 counts against him. He doesn't care about the documents that he stole. So if Donald Trump wins the presidency, again, what happens to the rule of law? And how do you create a new conservative legal movement with Donald Trump as the front runner?
Well, thank you, Mika, for that question. We are absolutely determined to get our message across to everyone about how the dangers of a second Trump term. And the thing about it is that we've seen governments in the past engage in abuses or illegalities in the United States and elsewhere. But this time, it's the program. And I think that's reflected in today's Washington Post article that talked about, as you said, Trump wanting to use the Justice Department to prosecute his former allies, his people who staunchly supported him. And in fact, there was an article last week in the New York Times that talked about how they don't trust the Federalist Society, that the Federalist Society to them now is part of the deep state. And that's because many people in the Federalist Society, myself included, I was a member of the Board of Visitors of the FedSoc for many years, and those law professors who have argued that Trump is disqualified from the presidency because he incited an insurrection. They're all Federalist Society members, all on the right. But the problem is the Federalist Society does not actually take positions on things, and it is divided. There are Trumpy people in the Federalist Society. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to create an organization that is strictly focused not on all the other issues that conservative lawyers have been focused on over the years, but is focused on preserving the rule of law and protecting the rule of law. And for that, we join forces with other people who believe in that. They may disbelieve, may not believe all the policy things that we believe in or believe in how to interpret the Constitution, but we do believe the importance of following the rule of law and making sure it applies to everyone, including former presidents and presidents.
Barbara, we heard George use the phrase you've been using, rule of law, rule of law. And I guess you could put it on a bumper sticker, but I'm not sure if people sit there in the morning and say, rule of law, rule of law. How do you bring it down to specific things that people would care about?
Well, I mean, as a former legislator and lawyer, I'm concerned with this undermining and now very blatant undermining that goes beyond Trump, with legislators, not worrying about undermining courts, just ignoring court decisions. Of course, after 2020, 60 court decisions that said, the election of 2020 was sound, but also undermining elections, so supporting elections, the rule of law. I mean, if we aren't going to support our election system, if we aren't going to support our election officials, that undermines, our very system and faith in our systems. So we really have to get back to supporting this whole structure of, our law and rule of law. So, or we don't have, these democratic systems that we all as legislators say that we believe in. So I think it's very important that the legislators, who many of them are lawyers, also are held to account for this, and that that they stand up and say, yes, I'm good. When I run for office, if I lose or win, that it's going to be okay. I mean, I had close elections. I won some of my elections by about 400 votes, and you have to be able to win or lose. It's over.